The hall was full of people, lights shining bright, cameras ready to capture every moment. It was not just another event. This one was special because two very different men, one a host loved for his laughter and honesty, the other a quiet actor known for his kindness, were about to share the same stage. Nobody in the audience knew what would happen that evening, but they were about to witness something that would stay in their hearts forever. From the very first moment, Steve Harvey came on stage with his natural smile. His voice was warm, carrying both strength and humility. People laughed as he shared simple jokes, but beneath his laughter there was something deeper. He had lived through struggle, pain, and rejection before he became the man loved by millions. Tonight, he wanted to share not only humor but also truth. And then came the surprise. The curtains opened slowly, and walking out quietly, almost shyly, was Keanu Reeves. The crowd gasped. It was rare to see Steve Harvey and Keanu Reeves together. Keanu, with his calm expression and simple black suit, did not wave like a star. Instead, he nodded gently to the crowd as if to say, "Thank you for letting me be here." The silence that followed was powerful. People could feel that this was not about fame or glamour. It was about something human, something real. Steve looked at Keanu and said, "Brother, I have watched you for years. People call you a movie star. I call you a man who knows how to stay humble." The audience clapped, but Keanu did not smile widely or raise his hands. He simply bowed his head and whispered into the microphone, "I just try to do my best every day." In that moment, the hall shifted. The energy was no longer about entertainment. It was about respect. Steve's eyes softened as he leaned closer to Keanu and asked, "What keeps you so grounded when the world wants to lift you too high?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for an answer. Keanu paused. His silence was not awkward. It was thoughtful. Then he said slowly, "Pain teaches you. When you lose people you love, when you see how fragile life is, you understand that kindness is the only thing that lasts." The hall went silent. Every person felt the weight of those words. Many knew Keanu's story of loss, but hearing it directly touched their hearts in a new way. Steve's voice trembled slightly as he replied, "Man, that right there is truth." He did not try to hide his emotion. He let it flow, because in that hall, truth was stronger than any script. Then something unexpected happened. As Keanu spoke about kindness, a young staff member backstage accidentally dropped a tray of glasses. The crash echoed through the hall. People gasped, some laughed nervously, others looked annoyed. But Keanu did not hesitate. While everyone else stayed seated, he quietly stood, walked toward the staff member, and knelt down to help pick up the broken pieces. The cameras followed him, and the entire hall froze. Here was one of the biggest stars in the world, on his knees, picking up glass with a nervous young worker who looked close to tears. Steve watched from the stage, his eyes wide. The audience did not cheer, they did not clap. They were silent, because they had never seen something so raw and real. The moment was simple, but it carried more power than any speech. Steve finally broke the silence, saying softly, This is what humility looks like." His voice cracked as he said it, because he knew he was witnessing something pure. The young staff member whispered, "Thank you." And Keanu smiled gently, brushing dust from his hands. He did not act like a hero. He acted like a human. And that was exactly why the hall was full of tears. People realized they were not just watching a celebrity. They were watching kindness in its purest form. This was only the beginning of a night that would test hearts, reveal truths, and show how two men, one who spoke with laughter, the other who lived with silence, could together melt the walls people build around their hearts. The hall was still quiet after Keanu helped the staff member pick up the broken glass. Silence had become the most powerful sound in the room. Everyone was still processing what they had seen. People were holding their breath as if they were afraid to let the moment go. It was no longer just an event. It had turned into a memory carved deep into their hearts. Steve Harvey, still standing on stage, placed his hand on the microphone but did not speak for several seconds. He looked at Keanu, then at the crowd, and then back at the young staff member who was shaking nervously. The boy's hands trembled as he held the empty tray and his eyes were wet. Steve finally said in a voice softer than usual. Most of us would clap when someone wins an award. But I think tonight we should clap for kindness. The crowd erupted into applause, but it was not the usual loud, playful applause. It was slower, deeper, filled with emotion. People clapped with respect, not entertainment. Many even stood not because they were told to, but because they felt it. Keanu, instead of soaking in the applause, looked uncomfortable. He gently motioned for everyone to sit back down. He did not want the spotlight. He wanted the moment to stay with the young staff member, who now looked at him with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. Steve, sensing the heaviness of the atmosphere, took a deep breath. "Keanu," he said, "you just gave us all a lesson without even saying a word. That's the kind of thing you don't see in Hollywood, and that's why people respect you." Keanu shook his head slowly. His voice was calm and low as he replied, "Respect is not for me. It belongs to people who work hard quietly. People like him." He pointed gently toward the young staff member who looked shocked to be acknowledged in front of thousands. The boy lowered his head, shy and overwhelmed, but the moment changed him. He had walked into work that night feeling invisible, like just another worker in the shadows. Now, because of one simple act, he felt seen. The audience was pulled even deeper into the story of the night. They were not just watching celebrities. They were watching a reminder of their own lives. How many times had they walked past people they considered invisible? The cleaning staff, the waiters, the guards at the doors. Keanu's action had cracked open a mirror for everyone in that room. Steve decided to lean into the emotion rather than run from it. "You know," he said, "I remember when I had nothing. There was a time I was living in my car, trying to figure out how to eat, trying to keep my faith alive. Nobody saw me. I was invisible too, but every once in a while a stranger would show me kindness, and I remember those faces more than I remember the ones who laughed at me." His words hit hard. Many in the audience had read about Steve's struggles, but hearing him say it with trembling honesty was different. Keanu listened closely, his head slightly bowed, his hands clasped in front of him. It looked like he was honoring every word. Then Steve asked a question that seemed to cut through the air. "Keanu, when you've been through so much loss, how do you still give kindness so freely?" The question carried weight. It was not a casual interview question. It was a wound being opened in front of everyone. The hall became still once again. Cameras zoomed in on Keanu's face, waiting for his reply. He stayed silent for a long moment, and then he whispered, "Because I know how it feels when you need it most, and no one gives it to you." Those words broke through the hearts of the audience. Some wiped away tears quietly. Others looked down, lost in their own memories of pain, rejection, or loneliness. Steve's lips trembled as he responded, "Brother, you're teaching us all tonight." But just as the room settled into that heavy silence again, something unexpected shifted the night. An older woman in the front row stood up. Her voice shook as she called out, "Thank you." Everyone turned to her, unsure of what she meant. She continued, "My son works backstage here. He's young like that boy you helped. He comes home tired and says no one even looks at him when he brings them water. Tonight you showed him and every worker here that they matter." The hall filled with soft murmurs. The woman's words added another layer of emotion. Keanu bowed his head toward her in quiet respect, while Steve put his hand over his chest. The night was becoming something no one had planned, a space where hearts were speaking without fear. Steve finally said, "Sometimes God arranges moments that no scriptwriter could write. Tonight feels like one of those." The audience clapped again, but this time it was not just for the stars. It was for themselves, for the workers, for the reminder that kindness is not about cameras or fame. As the clapping died down, Keanu turned to Steve and said softly, "People think we change the world with big speeches or big actions. But the truth is, it's the small moments that stay forever." Steve nodded, and the crowd listened like children at story time. No one moved. No one scrolled through their phones. No one whispered to their neighbor. Every eye was fixed on the stage, because they all felt something inside them stirring. And yet, even though the night had already touched so many emotions, nobody knew that more twists were still waiting. The night was far from over. Deeper stories, more painful confessions, and unexpected surprises would soon unfold. The night had already given the audience more than they expected. They came in thinking they would hear jokes, see a few smiles, maybe catch a glimpse of Keanu Reeves and his quiet charm. But what they were getting was something that touched the deepest corners of the heart. Still, the atmosphere was heavy, and Steve Harvey, being a man who understood the rhythm of people's emotions, decided to gently guide the moment forward. He looked at the audience and said, "You know, laughter and tears are cousins. Sometimes we laugh to stop ourselves from crying, and sometimes we cry because the truth is too heavy for a smile. Tonight, we're learning both." His voice echoed across the hall, and people leaned back in their chairs, nodding quietly. It was as if he had read their exact emotions. Keanu remained silent, his calm presence still commanding the space. But his silence was not empty. It was full of meaning. The cameras zoomed in on his face, capturing every blink, every subtle change in his expression. He seemed to carry 1,000 untold stories in his eyes. And then, Steve asked something that changed the course of the night again. "Keanu, when was the moment in your life that tested you the most? The moment where you thought you couldn't go on?" The question cut deep. The crowd inhaled sharply. Everyone knew pieces of Keanu's past, his losses, his pain, but to hear him speak of it directly felt dangerous, like walking into a sacred place. Keanu lowered his gaze, his voice barely above a whisper when he began. "There was a time," he said slowly, "when I lost almost everything that mattered. I lost the woman I loved. I lost the future we dreamed about. And I carried that pain in silence. People saw me smiling on screens, but inside I was broken. What kept me going was not strength. It was small acts of kindness from strangers. A smile at the right time. A friend who stayed quiet but sat beside me. Even someone holding the door open when I could barely stand. Those small moments saved me." The hall was silent. Not one cough, not one shuffle. People held on to every word as if they were afraid to miss a single syllable. Many in the crowd had faced their own losses, broken relationships, deaths, dreams that never came true. Hearing those words made them feel less alone. Steve, his eyes glassy, leaned forward and said, "Brother, you're telling us something the world forgets too quickly. We all look for big miracles, but sometimes the miracle is a stranger who notices us." And then something unexpected happened again. A young man in the middle rows suddenly stood up. His hands trembled as he held the microphone handed to him by a staff member. "Keanu," he said, his voice cracking, "my father passed away last year. I stopped believing in people. I stopped believing that kindness was real. But what you just said, it makes me feel like maybe I can try again." The room shifted once more. This was no longer just an event, it was becoming a shared healing space. People looked at the young man with compassion. Keanu's eyes softened. He raised his hand slightly, as if to bless the boy without words, and said, "Try again, because your father would want you to." The boy broke down crying, and strangers beside him put their arms around him. The entire hall had turned into a family, bound not by blood, but by shared humanity. Steve let the moment breathe, then added, "I'm telling y'all right now, this ain't no regular night. Something's happening here, something bigger than us." Just when people thought the emotion couldn't go any deeper, an older man in the audience spoke out. "I used to think respect was about money," he said loudly, his voice rough with age. "But watching this tonight, I realize respect comes from how you treat the ones who have nothing to give you." The audience applauded him, and Steve pointed toward him saying, "That right there, truth." Keanu nodded in agreement, his face still calm but his eyes glowing with quiet approval. The night was building layers upon layers of meaning. The broken glass moment had opened the door, but now stories of pain, resilience, and kindness were flooding in from everywhere. People were not just watching, they were participating. They were opening their wounds, sharing their truths, and being healed by the simplicity of respect and humility. Keanu finally spoke again, breaking the growing quiet. "We all live with battles no one can see. But if we choose kindness, even once a day, we might give someone the strength to keep going. We don't need to save the world. We just need to save one person, one moment at a time." Those words landed like lightning. The audience felt them burn into their souls. Some clutched their chest, others whispered, "Yes." It was not entertainment anymore, it was transformation. And yet, as powerful as the evening had been so far, something even more surprising was waiting backstage. Something neither Steve nor Keanu expected. The night was about to take a turn that would test not only their words, but their actions once again. The night had already turned into something sacred. Laughter, tears, confessions, and raw honesty had filled the hall. The audience was no longer an audience. They were part of the story. And yet, as everyone sat there in awe, something was happening behind the curtains that no one on stage knew about. It was building quietly, waiting for the right moment to burst forward. Backstage, a young girl who had been working as an assistant all evening stood trembling in the shadows. Her name was Emily. She was not part of the program, not someone the cameras would ever focus on. She was just there to hand out water bottles, carry cue cards, and stay invisible. But Emily had a secret. She had come to work that night after receiving news that her younger brother was in the hospital. The boy had been in an accident earlier that day, and doctors weren't sure if he would fully recover. She had wanted to quit her shift and run to him, but her family needed money, so she stayed. As Keanu's words about pain, kindness, and unseen battles floated through the hall, Emily's heart pounded harder. She felt like he was speaking directly to her, even though he didn't know she existed. She pressed her hand against her mouth to stop herself from crying, but tears slipped out anyway. Then, just as the applause from the last moment began to fade, the stage manager whispered something into Steve's ear. Steve's eyes widened. He turned to Keanu and whispered quickly, "Brother, something's going on backstage." Keanu did not hesitate. He stepped down from his seat and followed the stage manager, his calm footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. The audience leaned forward, confused, wondering what was happening. Steve, realizing this was no ordinary pause, told the crowd, "Stay with us, y'all. Something real is happening right now." The cameras followed Keanu as he moved backstage. And there she was, Emily, standing near the side curtains, shaking and trying to hide her tears. Keanu stopped in front of her. His voice was gentle. "What's wrong?" Emily tried to speak, but the words broke inside her throat. Finally, she whispered, "My brother. He's in the hospital. I can't leave because I need this job. I feel so helpless." The entire hall, watching on the big screens, froze. The audience saw the scene unfolding in real time. This was no script. This was life, raw and unedited. Keanu stepped closer, his eyes filled with quiet compassion. "You're not helpless," he said softly. "You're here and you're still standing. That takes strength, but family always comes first." He placed his hand on her shoulder. "If you need to go, go. No job is more important than being there for someone you love." Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks. She shook her head and said, "But I can't afford to lose this shift." Without a second thought, Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. He pressed it gently into her hands. "This is for you. Take care of your brother. Jobs will come back. Moments with the people you love will not." The hall gasped. Whispers filled the room. People could not believe what they were witnessing. This was not charity for the cameras. It was pure, immediate kindness. Emily sobbed, her hands shaking as she held the envelope. She whispered, "Thank you. I don't know how to—" Keanu shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. Just be with him. That's all." Steve had followed backstage and stood nearby, watching everything with wide eyes. He grabbed the microphone, still clipped to his shirt, and spoke to the audience. "Y'all, I've seen a lot in my life, but this right here is what real character looks like. Cameras ain't supposed to be back here, but I want y'all to see this because it's not about fame. It's about heart." The audience rose to their feet, clapping not wildly, but deeply. Many cried openly. Some hugged strangers next to them. The entire hall had turned into a family again, this time sharing Emily's pain and hope. Emily, still crying, asked softly, "Why would you do this for me? I'm nobody." Keanu looked at her with steady eyes and replied, "You're not nobody. You're somebody. Everyone is somebody. Never forget that." Those words pierced the hall. It felt like they echoed against the walls, settling into every person's soul. As Emily left quickly to see her brother, the atmosphere inside the hall was electric. People had come to be entertained, but instead they were witnessing something unforgettable. Steve shook his head and muttered, "This is bigger than a show." This is a lesson. Keanu walked back onto the stage quietly, his face still calm, almost shy. He did not act like a hero returning from battle. He simply took his seat as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But the audience knew they had just seen a moment of history. Steve turned to him and said with emotion in his voice, "You don't even realize, man. But you just showed the world what humility looks like when the cameras are rolling, and when they're not." The crowd clapped again, many standing, many with tears streaming down their cheeks. The night was no longer about two famous men on a stage. It had become about all of them, the invisible workers, the broken families, the silent battles, and the strength found in kindness. And yet, even as the emotion reached its highest point, Steve and Keanu knew the night still had more to reveal, because sometimes, when hearts are open, even more powerful stories come forward from unexpected places. The hall was no longer just a hall. It felt like a sacred space where human stories were being poured out like water and every drop mattered. People who had walked in expecting to be entertained were now sitting with wet eyes, open hearts, and heavy thoughts. They were not just watching Steve Harvey and Keanu Reeves anymore. They were witnessing themselves in the stories unfolding before them. When Keanu returned to his seat after helping Emily, the atmosphere had changed completely. The applause faded into silence, but the silence was not empty. It was full of respect. People were holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Steve looked at Keanu, shaking his head in amazement. "Man," he said, "you didn't just touch that girl's life, you touched everybody in this room." Keanu lowered his head slightly, as if to brush away the praise. "I only did what anyone should do," he said softly. "Kindness should never be rare. It should be normal." Those words dug deep into the audience. Many people in the crowd began whispering to each other, not gossip, but sharing their own memories of kindness, or their regrets about times when they failed to show it. One man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I should have told my brother I forgive him." Another woman quietly said to her friend, "I've been so cold to my co-workers. I need to change." The hall was not just watching. It was transforming. Steve sensed this shift and decided to open the floor. "I want to do something we don't normally do," he said. "If there's anybody out there tonight who wants to share their own story of kindness, courage, or pain, we want to hear it." For a moment, nobody moved. The idea of speaking in front of so many people felt frightening. But then, slowly, a young woman in her 20s stood up. Her voice shook as she began. "My father used to tell me that respect was earned by money. I believed that for years. But tonight, watching Keanu bend down for someone nobody would notice, it made me realize my father was wrong. Respect is earned by how you treat people when nobody is watching." The audience clapped gently, not out of habit, but with deep agreement. Steve pointed toward her and said, "That's wisdom right there." Keanu gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, and she sat down. Her face red with emotion, but her heart lighter. Then another person stood up, this time an older man with silver hair. He gripped the microphone with trembling hands. "I fought in a war," he said, his voice rough. "I saw people die. I thought the world was too cruel for kindness. But seeing this tonight reminds me of a soldier I once knew. He gave me his last piece of bread when I was starving. I never thanked him before he was gone, but I never forgot. Tonight reminded me of him." The hall was silent again. People bowed their heads, some praying quietly, others holding back tears. Steve's own voice cracked as he said, "Sir, thank you for your service, and thank you for reminding us what sacrifice really looks like." One by one, more voices rose. A mother spoke about raising her children alone and how a stranger once paid for her groceries when she had nothing. A teenager shared how a teacher's quiet encouragement kept him from giving up on school. A man confessed he had once mocked a homeless person, but later saw that same man save a child from running into traffic. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of the night. It wasn't just about Keanu or Steve anymore. It was about all of them, the whole room, connected by invisible strings of respect, humility, and resilience. Keanu listened to every word, his eyes steady, his expression never seeking attention but always giving it. When someone finished speaking, he didn't rush to respond. He simply nodded or whispered, "Thank you for sharing." It was enough. People felt heard, and that was the gift. Steve finally leaned forward, wiping his eyes. Y'all, I've been on TV for decades. I've seen a lot. But this right here, this is the most powerful moment I've ever been part of. This ain't about fame. It ain't about who's rich or poor. This is about us remembering what it means to be human. The crowd clapped again, but this time the applause rose into something larger. It was not just clapping. It was a roar of unity, a sound that came from the heart. People stood, hugging strangers, wiping tears, holding hands. The energy was overwhelming. And then, as if the night still wanted to surprise them, a child's voice rang out from near the front row. "Mr. Reeves," the boy said softly, holding a small notebook in his hands. "My mom says you lost people you loved. I lost my dad last year. How do I stop hurting?" The entire hall gasped. The boy couldn't have been older than 9. His voice carried innocence, but his eyes carried pain far too heavy for his age. Steve froze, his lips pressed together, his eyes already wet. Every camera zoomed in on the boy. But the moment was not about cameras. It was about healing. Keanu leaned forward, his voice trembling for the first time that night. "You don't stop hurting," he said gently. "And that's okay, because the pain means you loved him, and love never disappears. What you can do is keep his memory alive. Every time you choose kindness, every time you make someone smile, you are carrying your dad with you." The boy nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. His mother pulled him close, hugging him tightly. But the boy kept looking at Keanu as if he had just been given a new reason to keep living. The hall was completely silent, then slowly filled with sniffles and soft cries. People had never seen vulnerability expressed so openly by a star. And yet it wasn't his fame that mattered. It was his humanity. Steve put his hand on Keanu's shoulder, his voice trembling. "Brother, you don't even know how many lives you're saving tonight." But the night was still not done. There was one more story waiting to be told, one that would come from the most unexpected place and push everyone's hearts to their very limit. The hall had already been shaken with tears, laughter, and confessions. People who walked in as strangers were now bound together by shared truths. Keanu Reeves and Steve Harvey had opened a doorway into something beyond entertainment. And yet the night was not finished. The heaviest story was still waiting, and it was going to come from a place nobody expected. Steve sat on his chair, staring at the boy who had just asked how to stop hurting after losing his father. Keanu's gentle answer still floated in the air, and the crowd was silent, absorbing every word. Steve held the microphone in his hand, but he didn't speak right away. His usual quick wit and humor had been replaced with a raw silence. Finally, his voice cracked as he began to talk. "You know," he said, "I've spent years telling jokes, making people laugh, trying to give them joy. But I never told you all the whole truth about me. I've carried pain too. I talk about living in my car, struggling to make it. But there was something even harder. I lost people I loved too, and for years I was angry. I thought life was unfair. I thought God had forgotten me." The audience gasped softly. This was not the polished version of Steve's story they had heard in interviews. This was deeper, rawer. Steve's hands trembled as he continued. "I remember one night when I was at my lowest. I had no money, no food, no hope. I sat in that car and I thought about giving up. I thought maybe I wasn't meant to keep going. But then out of nowhere, an old man knocked on my window. He didn't know me. He didn't ask for anything. He just handed me a bag of sandwiches and said, 'You're gonna make it.' That was the moment that kept me alive. That man saved my life and he didn't even know it." The hall was dead silent. Tears rolled down faces. People leaned forward, hanging on every word. Keanu placed his hand gently on Steve's shoulder. The two men sat side by side, one telling his truth, the other holding it with quiet respect. Steve took a shaky breath and looked at the boy again. "Son," he said softly, "you don't stop hurting. But you keep going, because you never know when your story, your kindness, your presence will save someone else. That's what life is about. That's why we're all here tonight." The boy nodded through his tears, clutching his notebook against his chest. His mother held him tighter, and the entire hall seemed to exhale as if they had been holding their breath together. Keanu leaned into the microphone, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "You see, pain and love are twins. They live together, but pain teaches you to value love even more. That's why kindness is not weakness. It's strength. It's choosing to love when life gives you every reason not to. Those words struck like lightning. The audience erupted into applause, this time loud, powerful, unstoppable. It wasn't just applause for the stars, it was applause for themselves, for humanity, for the lessons they were all carrying home. People stood on their feet, many holding hands, others lifting their arms high as if the room had turned into one giant heartbeat. And then, as the noise slowly settled, Steve stood up. His voice carried the final weight of the night. Ladies and gentlemen, I want y'all to remember something. It's easy to clap for stars. It's easy to admire people on TV. But tonight proved something bigger. Kindness don't belong to stars. Kindness belongs to every single one of us. So tomorrow, when you see someone who feels invisible, notice them. When you see someone who looks broken, offer them a word. When you have the chance to do something small, do it. Because small acts are the biggest miracles of all. The crowd roared again, this time not just with applause but with emotion. People cried, people hugged, people cheered. The energy in the hall was overwhelming, almost holy. Keanu, still seated quietly, bowed his head. He did not wave. He did not take the moment for himself. He simply whispered into the microphone. "Thank you for letting me be here with you." And those words, humble and soft, became the perfect ending note. The cameras zoomed out, capturing the wide shot of thousands of people standing together, united by one unforgettable night. A night where a broken tray of glass turned into a symbol of humility. A night where invisible workers were seen. A night where strangers confessed their deepest wounds. A night where kindness became the strongest voice in the room. As the lights dimmed and people began to leave, they carried something home with them. Not a memory of celebrities, but a memory of humanity at its best. Steve and Keanu had not just melted hearts. They had reminded everyone of a truth too often forgotten. Respect, humility, resilience, and kindness are not rare gifts. They are choices each person can make every single day.